It began with almost nothing. The dull scrape of rubber on pavement, a paper bag tearing, and a short, dry thud that made the dusty windows of Main Street tremble. An old man fell to the sidewalk, still clutching a loaf of bread in his hand. People inside the bar looked up, then back at the TV. Someone stepped outside but didn't come closer. It happened fast and ugly. His sleeve brushed a polished motorcycle handlebar, the bike wobbled, and the younger, stronger man decided that was reason enough to throw a punch. The old man's name was Arthur Red Malloy, 82 years old, a former Marine, later an aircraft mechanic in the National Guard. 2 deployments in his youth, decades of work in a repair shop, and then quiet years of solitude measured in pills, bills, and distance to the nearest grocery store. Everyone in town knew him, the man who always nodded, never complained, and wore the same faded green field jacket that outlived every fashion trend. That morning, he'd gone out for bread, cough medicine, and a postcard for his great-grandson, a boy who'd just joined the Cadet Corps. It was an ordinary errand until he passed the bar where the bikers gathered. Laughter louder than it needed to be, chrome flashing in the winter sun, a bump of fabric against metal, and then the blow. Arthur didn't fall flat. He caught himself on one elbow, like an instinct buried deep in his body still remembered how to land. Dust clung to the loaf in his hand. A thin line of blood appeared on his lip. But the look in his eyes wasn't pain, it was shame. He knelt and gathered the crumbs with trembling fingers, the way some men fix what can still be fixed. Around him the air thickened with avoidance. No one wanted to see, because seeing means deciding whether to act. Arthur rose, leaning on his cane. Each breath was short and shallow, like the kind that comes when cold air burns the lungs. He sat on a bench near the bus stop and felt his old flip phone vibrate in his coat pocket. There weren't many numbers stored inside, just one that mattered: Eagle, Dad. He had promised himself not to use it unless it truly mattered. This time it did. The button clicked. Then came the wait. 15 minutes passed, just long enough for the town to pretend nothing had happened. The bar's music returned. Spectators drifted away. The bikers laughed again, as if noise could erase memory. Then the ground began to tremble. Not a lot, just enough to be felt in the soles of one's boots. Heads turned toward the horizon. Half a mile away, over the high school field, a dark shape cut through the clouds, low, steady, purposeful. The wind spun in circles, dust lifted, and the familiar whir of blades took over the sky. A UH-60 Blackhawk, bearing the insignia of the State Air National Guard, descended with the grace of something that didn't need to prove its power. Before the onlookers could react, a matte gray SUV rolled quietly onto the parking lot beside the bar. The doors opened in sequence, the kind of movement you recognize from people trained to move together. The first to step out was the county sheriff, followed by 2 officers, and then a man in a field jacket with no patches, but the posture of someone who spent a lifetime answering for others. On his shoulder, beneath a strip of tape, was a small insignia: Aviation Battalion, National Guard. His name was Danny Malloy, Arthur's son. He didn't shout, didn't posture. He simply approached the scene with the calm of a man used to making chaos obey. His team spread out with quiet precision, setting perimeter lines, asking questions, recording witness statements. The Blackhawk rested on the football field like a steel hawk at ease, waiting. It wasn't a show of force. It was a restoration of order. The biker who had thrown the punch tried to laugh again, but no sound came out right. Phone cameras lifted, but even through their shaky lenses, the story wasn't about revenge. It was about silence reclaiming its dignity. Arthur sat on the bench, hands folded over his cane, watching without bitterness. He didn't need to say anything. His entire life had already spoken for him. Years of service, of work, of quietly doing what was right when no one was watching. Today, something else spoke for him, the deep, familiar hum of a rotor that once meant rescue, hope, survival. The sheriff handled everything methodically. Statements, footage, arrest. No drama, just process. The kind that reminds everyone what accountability looks like when it finally returns. By evening, the story had traveled further than the sound of the helicopter. News outlets ran headlines. 3 words appeared again and again: veteran, respect, finally. But the most powerful part never made the news. A woman laid a clean napkin on the bench beside Arthur. A man stopped, placed his heart over his hand, and nodded. Then a few older men, veterans from different wars, stood shoulder to shoulder next to him. No slogans, no speeches. Just a line of silence stronger than any wall. Danny stayed back. He knew leadership sometimes means staying out of the frame. His presence was enough, the steady reminder that when honor stands up, the world still notices. By the next morning, the video had gone viral. Reporters called Arthur a hero, but he never answered. He wasn't trying to become a symbol. He was simply a man who had served, endured, and lived long enough to see his values return home. And for the first time in a long time, the town stood a little straighter.
In the days that followed, the town changed its tone. Not louder, just more honest. At the cafe near the post office, people stopped joking about getting old. A handwritten sign appeared in the grocery parking lot, reserved for veterans and the elderly. No one ordered it. Business owners simply agreed it was the right thing to do. The rest followed. On Sunday, the church bulletin carried a small notice asking for help repairing the ramp at the library. By sunset, twice as many people had signed up as were needed. Arthur moved through this new rhythm like a man walking through a light rain, slow, aware, grateful. Everything looked the same, yet felt different. People now met his eyes before he lowered them. Drivers stopped earlier at crosswalks. Teenagers held doors without being asked. It wasn't pity, it was respect, the quiet kind that doesn't need applause. Danny, meanwhile, found himself juggling 2 kinds of duty. As a National Guard officer, he knew the weight of a public moment like this. He hadn't asked for it, but the world had noticed. Interviews, comments, invitations to talk shows, all politely declined. He kept his focus where it belonged, on the mission, the schedule, and the silence of professionalism. At night, after the noise of the base faded, he checked in on his father. Short texts, shorter answers. "Everything's fine," Arthur would say. And Danny knew it was, because normalcy itself had become the victory. One afternoon, the county sheriff dropped off a letter. No return address, just the name Malloy written neatly in ink. Inside, a few typed lines and one handwritten sentence at the bottom. It was from the young man who had thrown the punch. He confessed, waived excuses, and volunteered for community service. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, it read, "Request to complete my hours at the local Veterans Center." Arthur stared at the paper for a long time. He'd seen enough in life to know redemption isn't granted, it's earned. He told the sheriff to send back a simple message. Let him come. Let him sweep floors, carry boxes, paint rails, and listen. But above all, let him listen.
The Veterans Center wasn't large, a single-story building that smelled of coffee, newspapers, and old pine. Inside were men who didn't need introductions. Different wars, different scars, different decades, but the same eyes that had learned to measure life in quiet moments rather than medals. The young man worked there for weeks. No one praised him, no one scolded him. They just gave him tasks, and he did them. By the third week, he no longer looked lost. By the fifth, he started arriving early. The town, too, began to find its footing again. A local teacher assigned students to write essays about the oldest residents. Kids who once scrolled past history were now sitting in living rooms that smelled of coffee and mothballs, listening to stories of what real service meant. Not the explosions, the after, the slow rebuilding, the steady kindness. Arthur watched it all like a mechanic listens to an engine, by the sound, not the shine. He knew when something was running smooth, and for the first time in years, the town didn't rattle. Danny made his own contribution. No headlines, just coordination. He organized neighbors into quiet shifts to check on veterans, fix things, drive them to appointments. No gifts, no speeches, just time. Time was the most valuable resource left in any town like this. 3 weeks later at the Veterans Center, the young man finished repainting the railing and left a small metal plaque on the table. No name, just 4 words etched into steel. Here, we serve each other. No one clapped. They didn't need to. The gesture spoke in the language they all understood. That evening, Arthur unlocked the old church workshop for the first time in years. It had once been a place where boys learned how to use their hands, not to break things, but to fix them. The dust smelled the same. The tools waited, lined up like soldiers, long dismissed but never discharged. He ran his fingers across the workbench, wiped the old safety rules sign, and thought, maybe it's time to teach again. The next day, a few names appeared on a list of volunteers. By morning, the workshop door creaked open to the sound of young laughter and the smell of oil. The old man was back at work.
Spring arrived quietly, almost shyly. Snow melted, revealing not grass, but the kind of earth that smells like work. The air carried the scent of oil, rust, and renewal. Inside Arthur's workshop, the sound had returned. Not the roar of machines, but the rhythm of purpose. Metal on metal, the soft click of wrenches, the low hum of focus. It wasn't noise. It was meaning. The boys came every afternoon after school. A few younger veterans stopped by after their shifts. No one called it a class. It was more like a conversation between generations, spoken in the language of work. Arthur didn't teach with words. He moved slowly, precisely, his hands doing the talking. Each motion said what needed to be said. Do it carefully. Someone's safety depends on this. He didn't preach discipline, he demonstrated it. One afternoon, while he was wiping grease from a gearbox, the door creaked open. A figure stood there, hesitant. The young man who had once thrown the punch. His hands were clean now, but his posture still carried the weight of guilt. He said nothing. He just placed a new set of tools on the workbench, ones he had bought himself, and nodded before walking away. Arthur didn't follow him. He didn't need to. That quiet act was louder than any apology. As the days grew longer, the workshop filled with light. Arthur often sat by the window in the evenings, watching the glow touch the metal surfaces. Each reflection reminded him that service never truly ends. It just changes its uniform. His mission now was patience, teaching, and showing those lost in silence how to rebuild themselves, one bolt at a time. Danny balanced his own kind of service. By day, command. By night, small calls home. No drama, no speeches, just the steady rhythm of responsibility. Sometimes between flights, he thought of his father's workshop and realized Arthur was doing what commanders dream of doing, leading without demanding. At the base, reporters still wanted interviews. Danny declined them all, except one, a quiet talk with a group of military students. He told them, "Courage isn't a headline. It's what you do on the days no one's watching." The veterans community began to follow Arthur's example in their own ways. Evenings at the center turned into storytelling nights, not about war, but about life after it. Men spoke about fishing, fixing boats, teaching grandkids to drive, and the taste of coffee before dawn. Each story ended the same way, with a small laugh and someone saying, "I'm still here." The young man from the workshop sometimes attended those nights. He didn't speak, he listened. But weeks later, Arthur found a folded note in the mailbox. "I started visiting my father again." It wasn't long, but it was everything. The story that began with a punch had turned into one of reconciliation. Summer came, and with it a calm the town hadn't known in years. The bar where it all began now had a bench outside. No plaque, no reminder, just a place to sit. Next to it, a small flag read, "For those who keep standing." Arthur sometimes walked past, but never stopped. He didn't need to. He had already finished that chapter. Now he was living the next one. And when people thanked him, he'd smile and say only, "Keep your back straight and listen to the wind. It remembers everything."
Autumn came without warning. Mornings grew heavier, and even the air seemed to move slower. The world around the town began to settle into the kind of quiet that only comes after years of noise. Arthur loved this season, not for the color, but for the rhythm. Autumn was discipline in disguise. Even the leaves seemed to fall in formation. The workshop ran like an old, well-tuned engine. Not loud, not perfect, just steady. A few of the boys he'd taught now guided new hands. They worked with the same patience, the same quiet pride. A hand-painted sign appeared above the doorway. "Repaired by those who still remember what service means." Arthur moved slower, but with purpose. His routine had meaning again. A cup of coffee at dawn, a walk to the center, a short call from Danny, and the soft ticking of the clock at night. Danny's unit was preparing for another training rotation. As the Black Hawk engine started to turn, he thought about how the sound of those blades was the same rhythm as home, just louder. Different mission, same heartbeat. That evening, before takeoff, his phone buzzed. A message from the veterans coordinator. "Your father says the workshop's running fine. He worked today without his cane." Danny smiled, not from pride, but from peace. That single sentence said everything. A month later, Arthur left a small metal tag on the veterans' center table. It bore the engraving of a hawk in flight and 3 words, "The service continues." Beneath it, a note, "For anyone who thinks it's over." When his time came, it was quiet. No drama, no headlines, just rest. At home, in bed, with the window open and the wind carrying the hum of distant engines. On his nightstand lay his old beret, his cane, and the keys to the workshop. He had said everything he needed to, without ever raising his voice. The funeral was small, but full. No brass bands, no speeches, just men and women who stood straight, as if the ground itself asked for posture. Danny stood apart, watching the flag fold in perfect corners. He didn't feel loss, he felt continuity,
His father hadn't disappeared. He'd simply reported to a new station, where silence serves as command. Weeks later, the Veterans Center launched a small project, led by the young mechanics Arthur had trained. They called it the Stand Line. No charity, no big sponsors, just people fixing things for the elderly, for free. On every repaired item, they engraved the same message: "Stand tall. Someone once did it for you." One morning, Danny received one of those small plaques in the mail. No sender, no note. Just the same scratched metal and steady words. He nailed it on the wall above his medals, and each day, before walking out to command another flight, he ran his fingers across it and remembered what service really meant. Not rank, not orders, not war, but continuity. The simple passing of strength from one set of hands to the next. Life in town went on. At the bar where everything started, a small donation box sat near the counter, proceeds for the Veterans Center. In the library, children now wrote essays about the elders they knew. No more forgotten names, no more invisible lives. And on the sidewalk, where an old man once fell, the bench remained. It stood quietly, brushed by wind and time, a small lamp above it glowing softly through every night. A new plaque hung from its backrest, the words carved by a steady hand. The service never ends. People who sat there, veterans, travelers, teenagers, anyone, found themselves straightening their backs without knowing why. Because even when the uniform fades, the posture of service remains.